Hello, we're taking a look at the SPS Now data entry, and this is for scenario B. Very similar to what you did before, just a difference in the name of the variables and such. Let's go ahead and get started. You can click on the start button here, but I recommend opening up the game in full screen mode. So here we are, SPS Now, variables and data entry, scenario B. And here are our learning objectives. So increased familiarity and confidence with SPSS. Ability to add variables, nominal, ordinal, and scale, and then also an understanding of the purpose for the data view and variable view tabs on the SPS program. In addition, just a reminder, SPSS is a registered trademark. This is screen image driven. They're not using an actual app. Those screen images are copyrighted by SPSS, and the tutorial is not sponsored by SPSS. Okay, so this is what we're going to be working to create here. So an SPSS project where we have these three variables: gender, time for hobby, and units. Gender is going to be nominal, and you'll see this little icon here for nominal. Time for hobby is ordinal, likewise a icon for ordinal, and units is scale, and we have an icon for scale. So it's three circles for nominal, like increasing bars for ordinal, and a ruler for scale. We have 7 records here that have been recorded, and we're currently in data view. And right now we're showing the value labels. All right, let's go ahead and create this. So we're going to switch out from data view, which in a new SPS file is going to be empty, right? So we're going to switch to variable view, and we'll define our variables. So our first variable, we're going to click here under the name column in the first row, and that is gender. And then our second variable is going to be time for hobby. And our third variable is going to be units. And you'll notice as we're doing this that, below it's kind of indicating, hey, what's the next step? And up above here, it's giving us some helpful information. So it's not necessary to this activity, but it's helpful. It's good to be aware of. So now that we've defined our variable names, and notice that there's no spaces in them, though we can use some capitalization to distinguish one word from the next, we'll go ahead and provide the labels. And the nice thing about the labels is they can be longer, they can have spaces in it, and the labels are going to go on our graphs and our reports and so on. Okay, and we'll go ahead and scroll to the right. So for gender, we'll go ahead and define our values here. So click under values and then click the ... and we'll record a number and a label, and we'll just for all the value labels for gender here. So 1 for female, and then we have 2 for male. And depending upon the variety in our responses, we might stop with just that, or we might add additional labels if there's greater variety in our sample. Go ahead and click OK. And then for time for hobby, likewise, in the values, we'll click on the ... And for value, we have 1 for wish I could, 2 for during the year, and we're just adding, and of course it's nice that it's just typing in the information for us. Normally we would have to do that. SPS is nice, but it's not a mind reader, right? So we have to do that part. And then when we're done with all that, we'll click OK. And then finally, we'll go ahead and indicate the scale of measurement for our variables. So for gender in the measure column, we'll indicate that it's nominal. Again, those 3 circles together. For time for hobby, it's ordinal. And it's the increasing bars there. And for units, it is scale, and we have a little ruler there. Scale are numbers that you could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Ordinal are categories that you can rank, and nominal are simply just categories that are there. One of the things you'll notice is we had to type in some of this stuff, but SPSS was also typing things in for us as well. Okay, so for gender, we're using whole numbers there, in this case 1 and 2. For time for hobby, again, whole numbers. For units, we'll go ahead to the tens place, so we'll say 1, indicating 1 decimal to the right of the decimal point. Scroll further to the left. And now that we have defined our 3 variables, some of the stuff that we've typed in, some of it that SPS filled in for us, we'll click on the data view. So we'll record the data for gender, and sometimes you might do it participant by participant, or sometimes you might just record all the responses for a particular question one at a time. We'll take that later approach here. So for gender, we typed it in, and here are all the responses. For time for hobby, likewise, here are the responses. And of course, these are numbers, and we've indicated what those numbers mean. So we'll go to the View drop-down menu and click on Value Labels. So now we can see what it is written out. And of course, if you had more data entry to do, you could still just put in the numbers and it would immediately turn into the written label as soon as you pressed Enter or Tab. And then likewise for units. And then we're done. And we can go into the game mode. So game mode, very similar to the earlier tutorial mode, except that now we don't have that golden rectangle to indicate what we're doing here. We're going to have to remember it from before. But it's not like you're just memorizing this, arcane sequence of steps. You're looking here down below, and I'll let you know what you want to do next. So switch to label. Oh yes, that's variable view, right? Specify the first variable that's going to be here in this first row in variable view. And SPS fills in the rest. Specify the second variable. So we'd be typing the variable name here, and SPS would finish the rest. And then provide the labels. So here's our label column. So I'll go ahead to the first row. And again, we'd normally be typing this in, but since it's a game, it's done for us. Scroll to the right. I'm just going to click on it. There we go. Specify values for gender. So going into the values column for the gender row. And then click the ... And for value, here we have 1 for female, 2 for male. And again, if we had other genders recorded, we'd want to make sure to have that here as well. In this case, we had just those 2. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. For time for hobby, again, we're going to click on the ... And we'll put in 1 for wish I could. And nicely, it's being typed in for us, but in the real SPSS, you'd be typing it. Continue to add. And now with all of them entered, we'll click OK. Then we'll go ahead and view the measure for gender. So here's our gender variable in the first row, and in the measure column, we'll click there and indicates of type nominal. Again, categories that you wouldn't rank, they're equivalent in terms of value. Then we have time for hobby, that's ordinal. And then units, that is scale. So ordinal, again, are categories that you could rank. Scale are numbers you could add, subtract, multiply, divide, calculate the average, and so on. Okay, with that done, scroll to the left. And then for gender, we'll use whole numbers. So I change that 2 to a 0. Time for hobby, likewise. We don't want them to have to type in 1.00 for wish I could, just the number 1 is sufficient. And for units, sometimes you have something that's like, 3 units, but it could be like 3.5 units or 2.5 units. So for decimals, we'll put a 1 indicating that we'll go to the 10th place, like again, 3.5. So 1 means you go 1 decimal to the right of the decimal point. Okay, we'll click on the scroll bar to scroll further to the left. We're back at the start for our variables. We'll switch now to data view, and we'll record the data. So I'll click in that first row under the gender column, and we have the numbers put in. Likewise for time for hobby, first row in the time for hobby column. And then we'll switch to the value labels so these appear as like normal words instead of just numbers. So view and click on value labels. And then for units, click here, first row under units. And there we go. Data entry is completed. Just click on the next. So at this point, you've successfully done the data entry. If you're doing this from a Canvas quiz, you'll see the 4-digit passcode provided by instructor. Go ahead and type in those 4 digits. In this case, it happened to be 5620, but it'll be different for every quiz and each quiz attempt. Click OK. And the 320, that's what you'd put as your answer to the quiz question to get full credit for it. All right, take care.